What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another League of Legends related video. In this video, guys, I am responding to Gbay 99's The Real Reason China and Korea Dominate League of Legends. My first argument against his video here is the title. I mean, it's my biggest argument, is the real reason. Is he tries to disprove that the things that we've previously stated as the reason that China and Korea have been so dominant don't really seem to matter nearly as much as these other things that he's going to bring up. Guys, that is just not true. I mean, that's just not true. These are all factors, and while his factors can be a big influence and could be a larger influence than the other ones, trying to say these are the real reasons is a bad argument. And it's just not because, like, Gbay, if Gbay watches this, buddy, I want you to know this isn't that I hate you. I actually love a lot of your content, and I really love to watch your videos. And that's why this video in particular kind of disappointed me so much, was the fact that this one was very much a straw man argument built on the idea that you are in a somehow superior spot to identify the problems that are here. But then the testimonies that you make and the ideas that you present, while yes, there is some ounce of truth behind some of these, it feels like you just didn't do all the research necessary to prove these things. You have a great fundamental understanding of soccer and things that are needed for soccer. You've showcased that you love soccer a lot. So I will defer to you on understanding the concepts of soccer to a degree. But other people that I am reading currently on articles of people being interviewed and excerpts being taken from studies being done in China to determine why the Chinese soccer team is doing so bad, it kind of disproves some of the issues that you present there. So we're going to be touching up on three of the big issues that I think were had in his video. And this is not to say, oh yeah, Gbay is wrong, but it's to kind of showcase that he could have been more right. There's a problem. Like, you know those stupid answers that you used to get, A, B, C, and D, and there's two of them are worded almost identically? Well, guess what? This one is going to be worded very similar to his, but there's just a few more things to touch up on that kind of disproves some of what he says, but then reaffirms what he says. It's weird. You'll see, guys. Let's get into it. All right. So first off, guys, to let you know, both me and Gbay's videos are ethnocentric. If you don't know what that means, ethnocentrism is the idea of applying one's standards of beliefs and understanding of culture to address somebody else's. They're going to be ethnocentric. They're going to be biased because we're both coming from a Western point of view, looking at an Eastern point of view, and addressing why the Easterns are doing better than us. We can only do grass is greener approaches to a degree here because that's just the way things are. But let's start it off with education. He does talk slightly about education and about this. And the biggest thing is, when he's talking about Confucianism, he tries to say this is a core belief that everybody lives by, but it's a belief that really addresses itself harder into their education system. This is an article here brought to you by Borgen Magazine. They're an online magazine. I'm not as, I have heard of them, and I've read some of their articles in the past, and their articles seem to be pretty well founded. And when I read through this one, it is an interesting one, and they're kind of comparing stuff, and so I take what they say here to a degree with a grain of salt, because it is a magazine trying to make an article and they're trying to prove a point, so they're going to be biased as well. But in this article, it does seem that they do have a decent approach of talking about them, and they have actually some comparative notes to Gbay and things that he says, and they're not conflicting some of the things he says, but they elaborate on the things he says and actually make his point a little bit better. And I feel like if you went just a little bit more in depth, his point would just stand out a bit more. And in throughout this article, what they're kind of talking about are similarities and differences between the two, and the fact that there is a collective and individual perspectives that is approached between the two. Collectively, there's a collective approach of when in education in Eastern countries that is driven by the collective approach that this represents your family. So if you do badly, it reflects on your family. On top of that, when you do badly, it's because you do badly, not the school. And it's kind of in reverse in Western cultures. When you go to school, this is a reflection upon who you are as a person and how you as a person think and become an individual thinker. And, for Westerners, that seems correct. But for Easterners, it's kind of the opposite. You do this to bring honor to your family and to express some type of dignity that your family can show and feel within you, and you are an extension of them. You extend from them. This is the Confucian kind of belief. You are an extension of your family, thus you represent them. And this goes all the way up through all tiers. You are an extension of your boss, you represent them. You're an extension of the company you work for, you represent them. You're an extension of your country, you represent them. So you take pride in all these things because you feel so attached. There's this collective idea that you are attached to all things within the place that you live. Meanwhile, we are much more individuals here in the Western side of things. I've tried to move out of my parents' house because I wanted to live on my own. Meanwhile, in countries like China or Korea and such, it might not be viewed that way. It might be just, I still live with them because, well, I'm a part of that family and it's not like a burden on the family. And at some point it becomes my responsibility to be the one who's in charge of the family and takes care of my parents and the generation after me. And to a degree that's still kind of addressed here in Western culture, but that's kind of to the extent of where he goes with it. He talks about the comparativism of the jobs breakdown between a father and a son. The father is to take care of the son and raise the son. Meanwhile, when the father gets old, the son's job is to respect him and to be indentured to the father and grateful for the fact of what the father did. And so now it's your turn to take care of him. We do that in Western culture too. We just don't have that responsibility as much, I guess, tied to it, as much of kind of it feels like I have to do this type of thing. I mean, it's still a responsibility, I guess, but it's definitely much more of a like, yeah, I feel bad and I should do it. It's like a should opposed to a have to kind of thing. But anyhow, when you look back into the individual perspective of the Western side of things really express that idea of challenging the norms, challenging the ideas that are set before you. And, you challenge them to better understand them or to be able to break them apart and make something new from them that makes more sense. And you don't do this in Eastern cultures as much because your goal is not to become this next radical individual who progresses forward. Your goal is to bring back something that your family can be proud of. So what they're striving for is different, which means that, when we go into the idea of esports, what they're striving for should also be representatively different, because this is a big cultural aspect and cornerstone that each of these two groups kind of go for. So when you are competing in an Eastern team, it's most likely that you are competing for you would think it's more like you're competing for your team. You have to bring honor to that team, and this then reflects on your family and reflects on your country and on your team and stuff like that. There's this idea of your self-identity is measured by your collective identity. Meanwhile, your self-identity and on the Western side of things is who you are. You have to be able to market yourself. Perks is one of the best Western players of all time. He is moving from top team to top team, and his loyalty to the team is only necessarily there while he's there and enjoys the people around him because it brings success to him. His perspective of it, and I don't know how much that is true to Perks. I'm not speaking like, this is for sure how he thinks, but just from a Western idea, that would be kind of the idea of it, right? You stay on a team as long as it's beneficial to you, not necessarily how long you can be beneficial for the team. And even the teams look at it in a way of, you're beneficial to us only as long as you are as long you're only indentured to us as long as you're beneficial to us. As soon as that, we're getting rid of you. In Eastern culture, they don't do that to that degree of, like, at least familial wise. You don't get ousted of your family because you're full disgrace, though you might if the family wants to save face and get rid of you. I don't know if that's how it goes, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems like it is then put on you to make better of yourself and repent and improve. Meanwhile, here on our side of it, it's not necessarily, the blame's not on you. It comes down to the group you're in. Oh, well, they didn't have the infrastructure set in place for me to succeed. They didn't do this for me to succeed. There's external factors that are at fault more so than individualized fault. Meanwhile, in the Eastern culture, it is about taking responsibility for your faults. So there's comparative differences there, and that's that Confucian belief that he's trying to express. And I feel like that's something he wanted to express. He just didn't kind of hit the nail on the head, right? Like, he came so close to getting there, but his argument felt a lot weaker because he didn't do the comparisons quite well. He just said, well, it's this idea of creativity, and that's where I think he messed up. Is he's expressing individualism and creativity as the same thing, but they actually can be quite different. You can be collectively creative and individually creative. They are going to have different results, but you have to have an idea of collectivism versus individualism opposed to creativity and collectivism. You don't compare those two. You compare individual and collective opposed to that. So because of that, it kind of strawmanned his argument a bit. It made it a lot easier for us to kind of knock it over and topple it a bit. But I feel like this helps rebuild it some, and I think it adds a little bit more credibility when you just talk about it collective versus individual, and how these two type of educational ideas kind of refer to Confucianism and how these react to each other. That being said, their focus in this article seems to tie to the next article a bit better into the fact that it's tied to China almost specifically. When you think of the East, you think predominantly China. They're the biggest thing there. But when you talk about the East, you can't just group them together. Much like in the West, you can't group them together. The US and Canada are vastly different in terms of our education system. The US and the EU are vastly different, and even countries in the EU are vastly different. So your idea of trying to collectively say these are how these things are done, it doesn't really work. Generalization doesn't always work. There's always an issue with generalizing and overgeneralizing, so you have to be very careful, which is where I feel like his video really gets away with itself, is that it overgeneralizes both China and Korea together, because when you look at the two, they do really well, but then you look at other East Asian countries and they're not doing nearly as well, and you can't argue the same points because they have similar values, they have similar structures. Why are they not doing as well? Well, those ideas of infrastructure and stuff that you tried to discredit towards the beginning of the video as not the real reasons have to be a part of it to a degree. Because if it wasn't, and it was just culture, well, most of these places have a similar enough culture and have similar foundation in Buddhism and Confucianism, like you say, that they should excel just as much. Japan should excel just as much, but there's certain factors that are completely wiping Japan from being able to do it, and some of those things are a weaker server. You can watch Don Wap's video about that. It talks about how they have a weaker server that is then weakened even more so by the fact that people from Garena go there and force them to have to speak English, so that nationalistic pride and identity doesn't get found. And that's something that goes into Chinese soccer, actually. Chinese soccer is very big on the nationalistic pride. China in general is about nationalism. If you go to their soccer team, they're struggling because their nationalism isn't there anymore. They're losing nationalism. Towards the beginning here, it talks about similar things that he said. It's their number one spectator sport. It's super, super popular, but they kind of suck. And you know why they kind of suck on an international stage? There's many contributing factors, one of which was the fact that the country was very isolated for almost 50 years. So they didn't practice internationally. They didn't get ingenuity. So they play a very traditional form of soccer from almost 100 years ago. So they don't play to the same game that everybody else is playing. They haven't adapted to the same degree that everybody is. So they're importing players to try to do this. It's kind of similar how NA is importing players to try to improve our own system without really actually improving the problems within the system. China is doing the same kind of thing in soccer. They're taking the NA approach in soccer. So NA is doing the same thing China does in soccer in League of Legends. It's kind of funny and ironic there that you're trying to prove that we're so different, but in actuality, there's so many similarities in certain things, at least in these key things. Now, that being said, in soccer, another couple of big problems they have is that there's a giant tie to toxic masculinity. So in male soccer specifically, the issue that they have here is that they themselves, as men, take pride in the fact of doing well. And when the men stop doing well, all men in the country start feeling it. You have this tie of men to men, women to women, country to country. So your national pride and your gender pride are there, and now men are doing bad, and women are actually doing well in soccer, which just influences the men to believe, man, maybe our manhood's at stake here, maybe we aren't men anymore. And that's what this part of the article talks about. This article is extremely well written. I really, really liked this one. It's factsanddetails.com. You can go there. For this one just trying to have little league soccer is literally what I put up. And I came down here, soccer in China, facts and details. And I read through this article, and this article is just very interesting. They do quotes to other articles and stuff. They have some really good sources, and they have a lot of nice keynotes, and they're looking at an expert's breakdown of Chinese soccer and a study as to what's going on. So the failure of the team is suffocating the people. I feel like I'm suffocating is one of the words that has been used. They're talking about how the yin is taking over, which is femininity, and this is something wrong with our yang. There's this belief that there's fundamentally something wrong with men. There's something that they can't control within them that's making them less of men, and that's what's causing their soccer. So they're not diagnosing their problems. But one of the cool things that I saw in this from this guy's talk here is right here. So Some think that soccer in China will only improve if changes are made in China as a whole. More transparency, the rule of law, less corruption, loosening the Communist Party's grip on power. This this here is asking for more individualism, this creativity type of thing that Gbay is talking about. Others think the team will only improve if individualism is downplayed more and there is a return to Confucian sense of collectivism. So this here is talking about that conflict again. They're having a conflict with themselves. They have quite a few individuals. They're bringing in a lot of people who are very that are Western and very much of individual thought process into their collective hive mind type system. So their system is breaking down from the inside out because it doesn't know which way to go. Do we keep going this way or do we go back to the way that we were before? Because way back in the day when we went the way we were before, we did really well, but somehow we were failing and we tried these new things, they're not working. Do we continue forward or do we backpedal? That's the question they're at. So they're caught in a middle ground right now. They're not identifying as one or the other. And that's the problem that their soccer is having, which again kind of downplays the factors that he's trying to prove that there's this need for ego and creative. Because right here, they're talking about they don't know if it's the problem that we don't have enough ego or there's too much ego. And that's where I had an issue with his thing, is where he's saying you have to have more. They don't have enough. They don't have anything. They're already arguing that there's a chance they have too much of it, and that's what's causing their system to break. Their system wasn't built for that. So that's why their system is falling apart. They also talk about lack of infrastructure in younger life here in this specific paragraph here, which I thought was very interesting because this is something I was looking into, because Chinese MMA, if you don't know, has a very structured approach to it. China in general has sports that are mandated by the government, that are controlled by them, that have these universities that kids start going to at a young age who are seen as good at the sport. They then go to these universities, start progressing really well, and as long as they maintain a level of excellency, you know, they start weeding them out year by year by year by year by year until just the cream of the crop are left, and those ones go on to become professionals that have gone through the full schooling of it. Now, if you are kicked out of the school, it's not because, and it's something that you have to look at in this eye that's a little bit different than here in like the Western side. They're getting kicked out of this not because they're bad per se, but they are not the best. And because they are not the best, they get kicked out of it. And it's no dishonor to your family, because many people get kicked out of these type of schools for that. It's different than the normal education system. You did really well to get that far. There's a pride that your family can have that you made it as far as you did, or even got into these schools to begin with. That is a high amount of pride, and you can still become a professional at that sport. Just because you got kicked out doesn't mean you don't. There's a guy who's known as he's the Shaolin Monk of MMA, Chinese MMA. He's not actually a monk, it's a gimmick of his, but he went to one of those schools, got kicked out, and is still one of the best in his sport. You know, it's just that, you know, the way that they measured that level of skill didn't amount to that. And that could be that right now, the way that they level their skill, the way that they identify their skill is just not there. And that could be something that Gbay hit on the head, right? Like, he kind of talks about that to a degree in his video. If you haven't watched his video, I still recommend you watch it, because a lot of the points I am breaking down here are in that video. He kind of talks about that their idea of what is skilled and what isn't might be wrong. And that is possible. They have a fundamental traditional belief, so there's a chance that how they are identifying what they need is not what they actually need to improve. It could be that they need more creativity, like he says, but it's not so tangible of this is what you need. You need more creativity, more ego. It may not be the case. It might just be the fact that kids don't get time to practice soccer. They don't have these schools for soccer. They don't have fields to play on. So, you know, starting at a young age, they can't get ahead at it. And if that's the case, that's kind of the whole infrastructure of China, is you start young, you prepare early, you get really ahead early, so that as you progress on, you still work hard, but as you keep that same level of hard work, you progress farther and farther and farther and farther, because you're already ready to progress really well. If they can't start that and ingrain that when they're young, then how are they going to have those skills when they're older? So there's some argument that they don't have enough infrastructure for the kids younger, which then again disproves this idea that infrastructure like this isn't the big problem. It could be that in North American League of Legends, infrastructure is the primary problem, and as we progress to make our infrastructure better, maybe we'll see some massive improvements, because Korea has a really good infrastructure in their League of Legends, and so does China. China has giant scouting for their people. Same thing for Korea. you have all these teams that are picking up these new people, and you see new talent constantly influxing in because there's so many good ones, and they're encouraged to keep growing because there's so many opportunities to get in there. You have so many people that have a chance to make it a pro, even though there's a limited number of slots. You have so many chances because of it. And China has Giant League, which gives even more opportunities for people to grow and go into pro. So, like, it could just be that the US just doesn't encourage this type, or NA specifically, doesn't encourage this type of infrastructure to increase their size, because NA is growing. We're just not growing as fast as the other regions, and we don't have as much success. So there's possibility that our infrastructure is what's holding us back. And I feel like this article specifically really goes in depth in proving some of the things Gbay says and disproving some of the things Gbay says, because it does talk about a lot of what he says, and it actually kind of agrees with him. But then, like, in terms of at least the individual collectivism argument, it kind of points to a different idea. Lastly, we come to Buddhism versus Christianity. This is something he also talked very heavily about in the video, and I feel like he does what he says here. You miss the forest by going for the trees. Like, this is kind of something he misses really hard here, because the core fundamental philosophy, the goal of the philosophy to eliminate mental suffering, the core of the philosophy is salvation from sin through the passion of our Lord Jesus Christ. So this one here is eliminating your mental suffering by the hard work and perseverance you do. Gbay hits that correctly. This one here, you still have to put through hard work and perseverance, but you then have to address a person who is of a higher authority to you, Jesus, to help you do that. On top of that, in both Catholicism and a lot of denominations of Protestants, you have to go through your clergy to do such. You have to go through your priest, your bishop, your ministers, sometimes your cardinals or your popes and your monks and your nuns, to reach this help of how to improve oneself by going through others. In Buddhism, yes, there are monks and nuns that do this, but they do this for self-improvement. So he is correct in this, but it's kind of ironic that he goes around talking about all these collectivisms, and then here we are in Buddhism, and it's talking about individualism and responsibility. This is individualism. This is your responsibility. This has no tie to your family. This has no tie to any of them. This is about you honoring your ability to reach nirvana and enlightenment. Meanwhile, in Christianity, it's about your tie to you, your church, and your God. You have an obligation to them and then everybody around you. So these two things, your religion teaches the exact opposite of the rest of your culture to a degree. So it doesn't like reinforce the idea that there's this collective idea that comes with Confucianism. It actually accentuates the opposite side of it, of individualism, and vice versa. Like, in the idea of egalitarianism being the primary focus of Christianity, while it's written a ton and it's looked at a ton, it's not actually the primary focus that gets preached a lot until modern era. The modern era has preached more about egalitarianism, but it's more of a feels-good egalitarianism, right? Like, it's not like, oh, we're all equal, and so we should treat everybody equally. It's we're all equal, so you should help them, and this will help you feel better about your own self and find that self-worth of yours that make you feel like you're going to be closer to God. It's not necessarily going out there and helping them because you should help them. It's because this gives you a relief from your sin type of feel. And as a person who, if you don't know this about me, studied to become a preacher and chose at the age of 18, you know what, maybe this isn't my choice in life. Actually, I think I was 19 when I first had my big conflict of faith. But from the ages of about 12 through 19, I gave a sermon at least once a month at my church. I studied the Bible. I've read the Bible 5 times cover to cover, not all in one sitting, of course, but like throughout a week, like cover to cover. And I have read so many different verses. Like, I can quote you some random verses if you want, but like one of my favorite ones, Psalms 38:7. Lo, there is a painful disease in my loin. Out of context, this is one of the funniest verses known to man, because it sounds like a guy's just complaining that he has like a fiery pain in his groin. But the pain in my loins is David referring to a pain in his chest, much like how you protect your loins, he's protecting his heart, and his heart is in pain because he's away from God. And this pain is so painful that it's like a fiery disease in his loins. That is the point of it, in context of what it's to be. And it's supposed to be kind of a, hey, when you separate from God, you're going to feel pain type of thing. So to prevent this, try to be as godly as you can be, type of thing. And the whole point of Christianity is to aspire to be like Jesus and God, and to be as pure and perfect as you can be. The purpose of Buddhism is to be as zen and perfect as you can be, to break out of the system so that you can become at peace and never have to be in suffering any longer. With Christianity, you go to heaven, be at peace, and no longer be in any suffering any longer. They both have ultimately the same goal. It's just that goal is then portrayed differently. Buddhism, it's, nirvana, of where you just nothing there. You're in a nothingness that is bliss. Christianity, you're in a heaven where you get to feast and do all these fun things that we perceive as humans perceive as fun and loving and something we want to spend eternity doing. There's very similar ideas and goals in these religions, which is why I don't really like his comparison of how Buddhism and Christianity really influence the differences. I do believe the Confucianism and the idea of philosophy does it, but also when you try to look at egalitarian nature of like we're all equals, that's not how Christianity worked for the longest period of time. Think about it. The church used their ideas and philosophies to control people. You paid lip service to the church because that was your only way to get into heaven. That was your only way to get past all this sin and stuff. So you had to acknowledge that bishops and priests and stuff were above you. Those are who you then would, defer yourself to. There is a level of hierarchy that he talks about in his video, how Confucianism and Buddhism say there's a hierarchy. Buddhism doesn't teach a hierarchy. It's all about you. There's no hierarchy. That is individualism. Christianity teaches hierarchy, and with that reinforces hierarchy in politics. The church has been very tied to many European politics for so many centuries. So this idea that it's like, oh yeah, nobody's above me except God, wasn't really very well versed. It does make you look at your peers of similar social groups with that type of idea of you're not above me, and then it then encourages some type of competitivism, which helped lend itself to the idea of capitalism. But it was only because of your social peer group. If there was a person that was in a social group above you, you paid respect to that person because that person could kill you for no other reason than they wanted to. They had the power and the means to do it, and you respected that person. So the idea of who you respected and why you respected people was a level of power in Western side. Meanwhile, on the Eastern side of things, their respect came from a natural need to understand that you respect your family, your parents, and you take pride in your collective group. And because of this collective pride, you will respect others, and there's this respectful nature, and maybe behind closed doors you have your individual nature to a degree, or in your religion is where you get to be more of an individual, where you seek out your own enlightenment and such like that. And so it was taught, your religion was your relief from collectivism to be more of an individual. Meanwhile, in Christianity, it was to reinforce the fact that you are under us, we are the ones in power, you listen to us, for we are the voice of God type of thing. So I hope this video kind of helps you guys kind of grasp a few things. There is one last thing I wanted to show you guys, and this one is really neat because it does break down the idea that it's all Asian culture, Korea and China. This particular writing is called The Confucian Perspectives on Egalitarian Thought in Traditional Korea. So traditional Koreans had a lot of Confucianism in there, and they still believe in a lot of Confucian ideas, but there's this ideology that's been coming around for a while now, and it's about if Confucianism and egalitarianism mutually support each other in contemporary Korean society, or are they mutually exclusive? And or are they incompatible even? It's kind of interesting, and it's a really neat read, but the reason I bring this one up, and I don't go really in depth on it, is it doesn't really do anything to really disprove Gbay, other than the fact that it disproves the fact that there is such a common tie between China and Korea in terms of this culture. Korea has looked to become more egalitarian, and if you don't know much about Korea, they're probably one of the largest Christian-believing Eastern countries, outside of maybe the Philippines. But like, they are one of the ones where Christianity is very deeply rooted now in their society. So this idea that it's all about these Confucian and Buddhist beliefs isn't necessarily true. Even Buddhism really didn't take a huge root in Korea nearly as much as it did in Japan and China. It did take root, but it didn't stick around and become so integral as it did in those two countries. And if we were looking as it's a combination of Confucianism and Buddhism that really meant these things that brought up all these cultures, you'd think Japan would be better, but Japan is actually kind of pretty bad at League. They are getting better because they're training with Koreans, because that's the server they have to train on to get better, because their server is so crap. And if you want more about that, go to, like I say, go to the Dongwop video and watch it about the Japanese server and see the problems they faced, which again are more external problems more so than their cultural problems. So take a look at this, guys, and take with what Gbay said with somewhat of a grain of salt. I get the reason that he did this. He made his article a bit more clickbaity to try to get more views. And he really, really honestly believed he made a very awesome argument. And he did have a lot of good points. There are some other things, which these are external cultural things that are influencing the game and influence how the players approach the game and how they fundamentally attack, the idea of becoming good at the game compared to Westerners. But it's not the only reason they excel. They do have external factors that give them a leg up on top of the fact of how they approach the game. So I think what he does here is a little bit disheartening, but it's not wrong in its entirety. He has some good points, and I love Gbay's videos, and I love the idea of what he tries to bring here. I just feel like he strawmanned it a little bit too much, and I really hope this video helps address some of that, and this video helps kind of bring about some ideas that, you can look into what he's saying a little bit more, and hopefully these articles that I have here are good for you guys. I will probably be linking the links to them down below in the description, so if anybody wants to read these, they can. And like I said, take some of these with a grain of salt. The one from the magazine specifically, this one here, facts and details, I don't know much about the site themselves, but they have so many different links and such. I mean, they do link Wikipedia a couple times, but they do link so much stuff about it. And my lack of knowledge of Chinese culture, of soccer culture specifically, this was very helpful, but it did just definitely reinforce some of the things that I had already seen about other Chinese cultures. So it definitely seems to mash well with some of the things I already knew about MMA stuff. And then this one here is just for a quick comparison chart between Christianity and Buddhism, which really is not any, you could really just look them both up and it's really easy. All these things are just talking about what you could find in their core doctrines of their religion. And then of course I'll be linking this one as well. But if you guys like this video, please give it a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, thumbs up, and I really wish that you guys go watch that Gbay video and give some support to the rest of his content. He does make some really good content. I feel like he just missed the mark a little bit on this one, but don't hate on him for it. And as always, guys, I hope you all have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. See you later, guys.